Okay, so going up. Tarn is learning how to be a blacksmith. Despite the weariness that made him drop gratefully at day's end to the straw pallet in the shed, Tarn's heart quickened and his spirits rose as the blade little by little took shape on the anvil. The heavy hammer seemed to weigh more each time he lifted it, but at last, with a joyous cry, he flung it down and raised the finished sword, well wrought and balanced, gleaming brightly in the light of the forge. "A handsome weapon, Master Smith," he cried, "as fair as the one I bore." "What, then," David exclaimed, "have you done your work so well? Would you trust your life to a blade untried?" He flung out a burly arm toward a wooden block in a corner of the forge. "Strike hard," he commanded. "The flat, the edge, and the point." Proudly, Tarn raised the sword high and swung it down to the block. The weapon shuddered with the force of the blow. A sharp crack and clang smote his ears as the blade shattered and the shards went flying in all directions. Tarn shouted in dismay and could have wept as he stared, disbelieving, at the broken hilt still clutched in his hand. He turned and gave David a despairing glance. "So," cried the smith, not at all distressed by Tarn's wretched and rueful expression, "did you think to gain a worthy blade at first go?" He laughed loudly and shook his head. "Then what must I do?" Tarn cried, appalled at David's words. "Do?" the smith retorted. "What else but start anew?" And so they did. But this time for Tarn there remained little of his joyous hopes. He labored grimly and doggedly, all the more dejected when David ordered him to cast aside 2 new blades even before they were tempered, judging them already flawed. The reek of hot metal clung in his nostrils and flavored even the food he swallowed. The billows of steam from the great quenching tub choked him as if he were breathing clouds of scalding fog. The ceaseless din almost addled his wits, made him crazy, until indeed he felt it was himself, not the blade, being hammered. The next blade he shaped seemed to him ugly, dinted, and scarred, without the fair proportions of the first, and this too he would have cast aside, had not the smith ordered him to finish it. "This may well serve," David told him confidently, despite the doubtful look Tarn gave him. Again Tarn strode to the block and raised the sword. Doing his best to shatter the ungraceful weapon, he brought it down with all his strength. The blade rang like a bell. This time it was the block that split in 2. "Now," said David quietly, "that's a blade worth bearing." Then he clapped his hands and seized Tarn's arm. "You've strengthened those chicken wings after all. You've proven yourself as well as you proved the blade. Stay, lad, and I'll teach you all I know." Tarn said nothing for a time, but looked, not without pride, at the new forged blade. "You have already taught me much," he said at last to David, "though I lost what I had hoped to gain. For I had hoped I was indeed a swordsmith. I have learned that I am not." "How then?" cried David. "You have the makings of an honest swordsmith as good as any in Prydain." "It cheers me to think that that may be true," Tarn answered. "But I know in my heart your craft is not mine. A spur drove me from small Avron, and it drives me now. And so must I journey, even if I wish to stay." The smith nodded. "You are well named, wanderer. So be it. I ask no man to go against his heart. Keep the blade in token of friendship. Yours it is, more than any other, for you forged it with your own hands." "It's not a noble weapon, and thus it suits me all the more," Tarn laughed, glancing at the ungainly sword. "Lucky it was that I didn't have to make a dozen before it." "Luck!" snorted David, as Tarn and Gurgi took leave of him. "Not so. More labor than luck. Life's a forge, say I. Face the pounding, don't fear the proving, and you'll stand well against any hammer and anvil." That was the story of Tarn and the blacksmith.